Good afternoon, everyone. So glad that so many of you could have joined us this afternoon. As you know, if you registered, people who registered this webinar will also be on the NJPSA website, so you'll have easy access to the webinar, the presentation, and the materials. I'm Pat Wright, the Executive Director of New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, and we are very, very proud to co-sponsor this webinar. It has been very exciting to see that all of the educational organizations in New Jersey have come on board to support the League of Women Voters. NJEA, New Jersey School Boards, New Jersey Association of School Administrators, New Jersey Association of School Business Officers, Garden State Coalition of Schools, the New Jersey PTA, the New Jersey Social Studies Supervisors Organization, and the New Jersey ASCD. So everyone wants to do what this webinar is entitled, Energizing Our Youngest Voters in the State. I have the privilege of welcoming you and introducing to you our two presenters from the League of Women Voters. First presenter is Dr. Pat Suplee, and she is currently the Education Director of the League of Women Voters of Southern Monmouth County. She has been a lifelong educator, now a retired educator. She has taught both nationally and internationally at preschool, elementary, secondary, and university level. She's also held administrative positions, including curriculum supervisor, principal, and chief school administrator. And with her this afternoon, although we can't see her because she had some camera difficulties today, but with her today is Peggy Dellinger, and Peggy is the president of the League of Women Voters of Southern Monmouth County. She is currently leading many of these initiatives for young voters and has been the co-creator of many of the materials that you'll see today. Peggy is the recipient of the state's League of Women Voters 2019 Distinguished Leadership Award. So we are very, very privileged and happy to have these two representatives of such a wonderful organization, the League of Women Voters. As we enter this presidential election this year, a very important election. You know, everyone's talking, as a matter of fact, we're doing this on the day of the presidential debate. But our focus as educators is really on helping our students and helping them understand not only the importance of the vote, but how the vote was won and how important it is to honor those who have fought so hard to get us this privilege to vote. And you're going to hear more about that today as Pat and Peggy talk about the materials that are available. Many of you may not know, but the 18 to 29-year-old cohort is probably the largest voting bloc in this election and will continue to be in the future. And all the more reason why it's so important to have as many materials and resources in schools to support students in understanding the importance of the vote. So with that, I want to thank all of our other organizations for also sponsoring this with us and turn it over to Dr. Suplee.
Thanks very much, Pat. I'd like to extend my thanks to all of the organizations as well. It's very rewarding to know that there are so many other people standing behind us and trying to help us do the job that we feel is so important. And Pat, I'd like to thank you as well and the energy that you and your staff put into getting this done quickly so that the materials are out there prior to the election, which is an important factor in getting the vote out this time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pat, let me just remind the participants too, before you start, that you're welcome to put any questions during the webinar into the questions box, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar. I have with me on the webinar, although you can't see them, Debbie Bradley, who's our Director of Government Relations, along with our Assistant Director of Government Relations, Jenny Lamont.
Great. Okay. Let me just see here for a second. All right, a little ad for the League of Women Voters before we start. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and what that means is that we don't take a position on candidates, we don't take a position on parties. However, we do take positions on issues that arise, on things that need input in order to defend our democracy. One example of those is illustrated by the woman that is in the upper picture there. Annette Scott is one of our members, and there was a change in the law on St. Patrick's Day that allowed those who have paid their debt to society for a felony and been released from prison to actually register again and to vote again, even if they're on parole or even if they're on probation. So that was a big step. But we do other things as well. For example, just into my mailbox today came a big long explanation of question 3, which is on our ballot this time, and offering the League's reason for making a particular recommendation. So it is possible to find lots of information from the League of Women Voters website, and I'd urge you to go to ours, which is League of Women Voters of Southern Monmouth County. So it's lwvsmc.org, and it will link you to lots of the information. Okay, end of commercial. Let's get on with what we're going to be doing today. We hope to do 3 major things. What we'd like to do is to give you a pretty good introduction to the 3 ready-to-use free lesson packages that we have available for teachers to use either in class or remotely with their students. The first one is called Student Voting Advocate, and that's something that I'll explain later. We would really urge you to use now because it's very important information for people to have prior to the election. The other thing that we actually began with is a unit called Fighting for the Vote, made up of 3 lessons. And Peggy will do a pretty thorough explanation of that, but it essentially talks about the struggle for the rights to vote, the turnout now, and then what we should do to make a change in that. And the third one is something that's really brand new to us, and it's called Vote by Design, and it fills a gap that was existing in our other offerings. We're going to explain to you how you can find them and use them, and it's really very simple. And then we have quite a list of other resources, and I'm going to take a few minutes just to explain each of those to you. So we're living in an absolutely historical moment. As you know, our world has changed dramatically, and we have a very uncertain future. We really have no idea what is going to happen in the short term or the long term. And because of that, the people who were responsible for elections need to think about how that was going to take place, because it's constitutionally mandated that the election take place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So there was no changing the date. So in order to safeguard voters, safeguard poll workers, many of whom are elderly and so in a high-risk group, as well as to maintain the integrity of the vote, there needed to be some changes made. Voters, as a result, need a lot of information about those changes and many, many assurances, because I'm sure you've heard too all of the concerns about, well, is my vote going to be counted, and is it safe, and so on and so forth. Another thing that's really important is that the deadlines are fast approaching. Within the next month, well, by October 13th, registration ends for the coming election. And in order to cast a ballot, the ballot has to be completed and postmarked or returned by 8 p.m. November 3rd. So people's expectations need to be reset. And I'd like to give you just a little piece of history that I think helped me when I was first confronted with all of the changes. This is not the first time that we've been in an historical moment. And if we go back far enough, we realize that earlier in our history, the communications between different areas of the country and the travel restrictions and difficulties between different areas of the country made it absolutely impossible for voting day to be the last day and the day on which we knew the results of an election. Instead, that day, election day, was a deadline, which it is today. It's the deadline for voting. And the results came in later. In fact, they came in so much later that our original inauguration day was in March, and that wasn't changed until quite a bit later. So the fact that we are not going to get the election results on November 3rd doesn't mean that the election is not a legitimate election. It just means that we need to wait a little bit. So we need to reset some expectations that people have. It provides a unique opportunity for us to empower students because they are a unique group who have the skills that are needed to help the older folks in our country become comfortable making sure that they're registered remotely, making sure that they can vote by mail. So the kids have a really important role to play during this upcoming election. To try to address that, we developed something called our student voting advocate, and we have a toolkit that the students can use as well. There are two parts to it. There's a teacher package, which you as teachers or the teachers in your schools can use to teach the children, the students, why their votes count, how to register remotely, and how to cast a ballot during this election. There is also a student package, and it's kind of a skinny down version of the teacher package. It has many of the same slides that the students can access on their phones or their Chromebooks or whatever they have to share with the adults that they hopefully will sit down with and guide through the process. When a student or a kid comes to you and says, you know, Grandma, shoot, that would be me. You know, I know this is confusing. Can I help you go through with it? And it's offered with love. It reduces the concern that some people have about going through the processes. The student package helps those students help their adults, the adults in their families, the adults in their pods, register remotely and cast a ballot. And it's available in Spanish. So if students have parents who are more comfortable in their native language, which would be Spanish, they can use that version instead. So what's covered in this? The first, and this is the teacher package, the first part is we try to give the students some motivation. So what? Why is it important to vote? And what we try to make them understand is that it's not just the vote for the president that counts, because some of the students will give us excuses like, well, you know, the electoral college makes that immaterial. And that may be true in the presidential election if you live in a really blue state and all of the votes are cast for the one candidate based on who wins in the state. But it's not true for any other position that's up for election. Your vote counts as your individual vote. We also try to get them to understand that they're part of a bigger block, that politicians listen to the people who are in the size of the blocks that are going to get them reelected or elected for the first time. So there's an age voting block, there's a gender voting block, there's an education level voting block, and there are ethnic voting blocks. So the more people that are in those blocks, the more value, the more power their vote has. And if they don't vote, then they're not adding to that power. And then the other thing that we do is to help them understand who is actually being heard. Now, Pat mentioned that the 18 to 29-year-olds are the largest voting bloc. They beat out the baby boomers for the first time. And therefore, their vote has a great deal of power if they use it. But that is the lowest turnout group of all. So we try to encourage them to encourage their peers as well as those in their families to get out and vote. And then the rest of the package is how to. It walks them through the registration process online. It gives them every little bit of detail that they might need to know to answer questions, and it gives them a source they can go to if the written materials don't. There's a printed guide and there are the slides. It does the same thing for vote by mail. And if you can see, there's a little blue circle on that. How do you fill out the vote by mail ballot? There's even a short video that walks people through it for them. All of our packages, we try to make as flexible and as adaptable as possible so the teacher has a wide range of control over what happens. Our recommended design is that it's used in a virtual classroom. That is how we set this up. And the teacher can present it him or herself, or if they contact us, we are happy to provide a trained league facilitator who will deliver it virtually as if there's a virtual guest speaker in the classroom. So that may be very attractive to someone who is struggling to make sure that all of the lessons they have are well designed and carefully delivered. In the package, there are some homework assignments that the teacher can or choose not to use. And there is a way to have the teacher check afterwards to make sure that there was understanding. And then there's also a section where we're encouraging the teachers to hold a contest, but we're encouraging students to develop a meme or a little short video that they can use to encourage other students to vote. What we know is that students are much more likely to influence other students than the older folks in their homes or in their lives. The second package is Fighting for the Vote, and I'm going to turn that over to Peggy because this was her original idea, and it's pretty remarkable. Peggy?
Thank you, Pat. The student voting advocate package that Pat just described is adapted to this year's general election. So clearly it has a critical path to November 3rd. And this sense of urgency is why we put it first. I'm going to talk about Fighting for the Vote, which is foundational to the Energizing Young Voters suite of officers. And we like to think of it as our flagship product. It was the first one that we developed and everything grew from that. Fighting for the Vote is a 2-module interactive remote classroom lesson with a single focused objective to turn students into lifelong voters. It consists of 2 modules. In module 1, students take on the identity of an avatar they are assigned. The avatars have attributes relating to the eligibility to vote over our history. The narrative that's told in Module 1 is of the fight for the vote, and as the students' avatars become eligible, they join a human timeline of suffrage milestones. The experience we have seen builds an emotional connection between the student and the struggle for the vote. In Module 2, having built this connection to the sacrifices made in the struggle for suffrage, students see the statistics on who actually turns out to vote. The contrast between the commitment it took to get the vote and the commitment it takes to go out and vote surprises them as they analyze turnout for their own age and ethnicity. Next, Pat, please. We've been delivering Fighting for the Vote in classrooms ranging from 6th grade through college since the fall of 2018. When COVID-19 upended our lives and canceled our scheduled in-person gigs, we converted the program for the remote classroom. The photos that you see on the slide are of the in-person lessons. I just thought they might be fun to get a kind of window into what it looked like. You can see on the bottom left the students who are forming this human suffrage timeline as their avatars became eligible to vote through US history. The materials for the remote classroom are now ready to go. So we've converted them all into a PowerPoint package that adapts beautifully to whatever platform you're using to deliver remotely. And Pat and I have had the chance to deliver this remote version at the start of the school year in 2 different venues. And we're happy to report that the conversion worked. And in fact, it worked so well that we're tempted to say that aspects of the Fighting for the Vote Module 1 were more powerful remotely than they even are in person. Next, Pat. Let's just take a deeper look at Module 1. So it looks at American history through the lens of suffrage, from the Revolutionary War to the 26th Amendment in 1971, which lowered the voting age to 18. So the students are assigned their avatars, complete with a name, an image, and a list of characteristics that map to voter requirements. When we're doing this in person, we just hand out cards, index cards, as the students walk into the classroom that has their avatar identity on it. But online, the teacher makes this assignment of avatars to the students in advance of the classroom lesson. And the avatars are assigned both in person or remotely in proportion to the percent of eligible voters at different points in our history. And that point that I've just made will become relevant as I go on and describe what happens. As the students' avatars become eligible to vote, the students join the timeline. In person, they stand and create a physical timeline, as we saw in the photo on the earlier slide. But we were surprised to see how well the virtual timeline works. All the students start with video cameras off. As their avatars gain the vote, the teacher or the presenter turns off the screen share and invites anyone who is now whose avatar is now eligible to vote to turn on their videos. And the visual impact is dramatic. At the start, fewer than 10% of voters represent the whole class, and metaphorically, the whole population of the United States. And you see the expansion of suffrage take place on the screen before your eyes as students join each milestone as their avatars become eligible to vote. And the teacher is debriefing and calling attention to how the number of voters and therefore the fair representation of the voice of the populace is growing over our history as each of these hard fought milestones is reached, whether it's former male slaves, whether it's women, whether it's 18-year-olds. You'll see the representation and the democracy expand. Once the timeline is complete, which we consider to be the 26th Amendment in 1971, which is kind of the legal changes to the eligibility to vote, we continue the story in Module 1 through the Jim Crow era, through the Civil Rights Movement, to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and we cover those groups, Indigenous Americans and Asians who were denied naturalization rights, and we introduce all of those by virtue of a discussion and in some cases an avatar if the teacher chooses to use that. We bring it all the way up to 2020, and we introduce the students to current voter suppression efforts. And throughout, we're making the emotional connection to what sacrifices people were willing to make in order to gain this precious right to vote. We start out the Module 1 asking the students to write privately what they believe in and care about enough to be willing to go to war or go to jail in order to achieve. And we bring them back to that question at the end of Module 1. And we point out to them, and that's a private question and a private answer. We ask them to look at their answer and remind them that they've just heard that thousands of Americans were willing to go to jail, to go to war, and even to die for the right to vote. And that concludes Module 1. So Pat, if you'll move us ahead. In Module 2, which can either take place immediately or on another day, the gist of the information is an analysis of voter turnout. So we're focusing on voter turnout by age, by ethnicity, and by education level. Historically, the older you are, the whiter you are, and the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote. And this message becomes clear to students as they look at each of these variables and the breakdown of voter turnout over time by those different variables. And the results open the students' eyes. We called their attention to the turnout in 2008 and 2012, and the students proposed their own theories about why Black and young voters turned out in those elections in unprecedented numbers. And what we get them to do is start to internalize by looking at these graphs, how much they are abdicating, how much their age group, their ethnic group, and their education level group are abdicating their voice, silencing their voice when they choose not to vote. Then we turn our attention to the question, why aren't people voting? And what would you say to them when they give you their excuses? And again, interactive, they role play. We have cards that give potential excuses for not voting and potential answers to those people who might offer those excuses. And the kids back and forth to each other give the excuse, and then another student will give the response to that. Next, Pat. So how are we doing with this? The results have been encouraging. We use the intention to vote, which the literature and research shows is a reasonable surrogate for actually voting. So we use change in intention to vote, which is something we can actually measure in real time with the students as a surrogate for the effectiveness of the Fighting for the Vote modules in changing the probability that these students will vote and become lifelong voters. We administer a pre-questionnaire to take a baseline, followed after the second module with a post-questionnaire. And on the questionnaire, among other things, we ask their intention to vote in 4 different categories of elections. And those 4 categories are shown on this graph. And you can see that in every case, Fighting for the Vote has a positive impact on students' intention to vote. The greatest increase is with the Board of Education, 25 percentage point increase, a small increase, but we start high. The presidential vote, before they even hear Fighting for the Vote, 89% of the students report they would intend to vote in a presidential election, but even that one bumps up by 2 points. We're able to show you these results for that subset of students for which we were able to administer a pre and post questionnaire, and for which those questionnaires were the same across a group of classes, because we've been working with universities to refine our questionnaire and refine and certify the statistical significance of our results. And so that's why the questionnaire and the methodology changed in a way that we couldn't include all of our results in this, but this was our largest group that we could could have confidence in a statistically valid comparison. Next, Pat. The questionnaire also asks students for some verbatim responses. And among the questions we ask them is, what did you learn that made a difference to you personally? So we've selected a representative sampling here. And I just wanted to point out to you that students have told us, having heard the struggle for the fight for the vote, that they want to vote in order to honor those people who made sacrifices to gain the right to vote. We heard that they want to stand up for their group, whether it's young people in the 18 to 29 cohort, or whether it's their ethnic group, or whether it's young people who are only now at high school level education. They want to know that those groups have a voice that will be listened to by the people in power. They want to know that they're embarrassed that their age group doesn't vote or their ethnic group doesn't vote, and they want to turn that around. And so forth. So what we're seeing is that the information that is eye-opening to them, that they're being exposed to in Fighting for the Vote, is actually making an emotional connection to them in a way that is changing their intention to vote. Next, Pat. So again, like everything that we've tried to put into the Energizing Young Voters suite of offerings, this too is adaptable and flexible. You can have the classroom teacher deliver it either in person or online, and you can deliver it as module 1 immediately followed by module 2, which takes a full block. If you're using blocks, it takes a good block, ideally 2 hours, or you can break it up and do module 1 on one day and module 2 on another day. And you can do it, we have it as PowerPoint slides, we have it as Google slides. Or you can use one of our trained lead facilitators invited to present to your students as a guest speaker, module 1 and module 2 via Zoom or Google Meet. So I'd like to turn it back now to Pat to talk about the next offering in the Energizing Young Voters suite of offerings.
Thanks, Peggy. When Energizing Young Voters began to grow exponentially, it was just amazing to watch the interest that there was among different groups. We decided to develop a youth voters advisory board because we realized that those were the people who could tell us best what it was that was going to work with children and with young people their age. The one young woman from MIT said, "I don't get it. I just don't get it." She said, "These kids, they'll get out, they'll march for Black Lives Matter, they'll get out there and do demonstrations for gun control, but they don't vote." And then the discussion evolved, and the realization was that the kids don't make the connection between demonstration and legislation. And so we needed somehow to get them to start thinking about the fact that those things they care about deeply can be translated into an action that they can take that may actually bring about change in the world that they live in. And just very shortly thereafter, I was introduced to a young woman, Lisa K. Solomon, who is at Stanford University at the design school out there. And she developed a piece that fit beautifully. So after a conversation, we've agreed with one another that our materials work together. So she is going to be using ours and we are going to be using hers. Vote by Design is one lesson that helps students determine what leadership qualities they personally value, and it helps them determine what future issues, not the things that have happened in the past, but what's likely to happen in the next 2 years or the next 5 years that is going to have to be solved. And the lesson helps them overlay those two things. So what leadership qualities will help them solve that? And then they look at early presidential primary debates. And through the lens of what they've just determined is important to them, they look at those candidates' presentations and decide if that is the kind of leader with the qualities that they want, addressing the kinds of problems that they need or not, or who is the better one in terms of their personal beliefs. So this is nonpartisan, but it's also issue agnostic because the kids are looking at it in terms of what is important to them. The lesson supports critical thinking, and it helps even kids who are not yet going to be of voting age, helps them think as voters should think. This is, if you log on to their website, one of the things that I would strongly urge teachers to do is to actually watch this lesson taught virtually. It's really impressive, and it's like a teacher in service, using the strategies that it's Lisa who's teaching it, using the strategies that are there. And the link is up at the top in the bar. There's also an educator's field guide and lesson plan. You can take a quick look. It's best suited for high school and for college students, but it can be used younger. I wouldn't say younger than middle school, but it certainly could be used down to middle school. The lesson takes 45 minutes, 90 minutes if you use all of the supplementary materials that are available, but again, you can break it up. It is flexible, just like the other programs. It is completely free. You can use the lesson via Zoom or via Google Meet. They also use Nearpod, which is a way in which they can generate polls and use a bulletin board that is really kind of intriguing. If you haven't already taken a look at it, that is also free, and the link there is an active link. Everything is in that guide, so the only preparation that's needed is that you look at the guide and you plan the lesson from that. It is a comprehensive field guide. One of the things when Lisa and I spoke, I said we offer with our lessons the ability for a facilitator to teach it for teachers in the classroom. And she said, well, actually, we're doing that too. We're doing that during high school voter registration week, which just finished. And she said, but if your teachers, if they acknowledge or if they mention that they heard about us through the Energizing Young Voters program, we will do the same thing. And so there is a form at the link that's on the screen there. Teachers can fill out that form. Someone from Vote by Design will be in touch with them and help to schedule a presentation. There's also something new. It's an independent study, like a workbook. It's a PDF. It doesn't translate well into the screen, but it is a PDF and teachers can use that. And just now, there are also two things to help the students, guide the students through the presidential and the vice presidential debates that are just coming up. It reminds them of the leadership criteria that they were interested in and the problems that they're concerned about, and then it gives them a debate scorecard. That's probably not terribly original, but at least it's all there on the website together. So the next steps are for you to make some decisions. And one of the things that I would ask you to consider strongly is if any of these programs are of interest to you, or if all of them are, that you consider using the Student Advocate Toolkit first, because of the fact that the election is only a month away. I would ask that you urge the students to use the registration materials between now and October 13th, which is the deadline for registration, and then redirect them on October 14th and urge them to help people actually fill out the vote by mail ballots and respond to whatever questions and concerns they have. That's a recommendation just based on the time. It's not because that one is any better than any of the others. They're all excellent programs. But if you're going to choose something different, if you want your students to appreciate that arduous struggle that Peggy was talking about, then you can contact us for Fighting for the Vote materials. If you would like to have Vote by Design materials, you need to contact Vote by Design directly, and that's votebydesign.org, so it's very easy. If you would like to have us come in to present a program for you, you can do it one of two ways. The preferred way is to use energizingyoungvoters@gmail.com, and that's monitored daily, so someone will get back to you very quickly. You can also go to the League of Women Voters website, and you can contact us through that. There are a few more resources, and I'm going to take just a few minutes because there are some of these that I want to make sure that you and the students know about. The first one there is that our league has developed or has established a dedicated text number. Anything that comes to this text number is used strictly for voting purposes. And we've urged children and adults to type the word vote to this, or text the word vote to this number, and they will get whatever info. They'll get reminders for voting. If they need a form, like they need a registration form in paper format because they don't have a printer to print out a form, they can get that from us. You just need to text it, someone will get back to you. The vote by mail video that is included in one of those slides that was earlier here is about 3 minutes long, but it is a really complete and easy to watch and easy to listen to video that shows you every single step of the vote by mail process, which is not uncomplicated. I mean, you have to make sure that you sign places and that you don't turn certain things on and that certain things show through this window and that window. So it's very clear and very direct. And I'd urge you to take a look at it yourself and share it with anyone that you think might be interested in it. The statewide League of Women Voters contacted me about a project that's beginning at Rutgers Camden called Project 555. And the 555 stands for the number of school districts or high schools in the state of New Jersey. This is a student-led, nonpartisan Virtual Voter Registration Assistance and Education Project. What they will have done is to have security clearances run on some students, and if there is a question or an issue and someone needs guidance through the registration process, one of their students will help that. My Voice, My Vote New Jersey is an in-person thing that was coordinated with the NJPSA and the League of Women Voters last year when we could do it in person. Voting at the polls is also in person, but when we get back to the time that you can do things in school, this is one of the most powerful voting experiences that I've been aware of. It actually walks the students through every single step, from registration all the way up to pulling the lever. There are students who are challenged that they voted by mail when they say they didn't, and they're taught, the whole place is at that moment, talk about a teachable moment, taught how to use a provisional ballot. There are people who are left off the register so that students know that sometimes they'll be challenged because they're not in the right voting district. The experience is wonderful, and the faces on students when they walk out of that voting booth, having cast a ballot on a real ballot that was programmed into the machine, and the machine came from the county office with a monitor, it's an absolutely wonderful experience for them. So once you can get back into school, take a very close look at that. The webinar that's listed at the top is for adults. So those of you who provide teacher and service programs, PTA programs, Board of Education programs, anything like that, this is pertinent right now. It's up to the minute, accurate information on voting in this coming election, and helps deal with both facts and fictions. Vote411.org is a product of the National League of Women Voters, and it is the go-to source for all things voting. You put in your address, and what you will find out is what is on your particular ballot. You can check to see whether your registration is accurate or in place. You can find out your polling place. You can discover upcoming debates and so much more. And I will make a point when we talk about voter registration, some people forget that they've changed their name since their last voter registration or their address. But the biggest thing that I'd like you to be sure to pay attention to is signature change. So many of us, like us, registered a long time ago, and the signature that we had then at the age of 21, say, is not the signature that we have today. A mismatch in signatures was one of the biggest reasons why votes were rejected during the primary. And so it's really important to make sure your signature matches. And the easiest way to do that is to just send in a registration form for signature change. The League of Women Voters of Southern Monmouth County has hot topic webinars. These are recordings of presentations which a teacher can use in the classroom. They're listed there, and I will tell you, Peggy does the Electoral College one, and every time I watch it, I learn something new. So take a look at that one. Something that's been new is that we have added service points. With students being at home, but still being parts of organizations like Honor Society and ROTC, we were approached and asked if we could set up some kind of a system so they could get volunteer hours. Well, it was a perfect match for us because we were looking for young people who would be willing to work with us as co-presenters. And so we have begun with a few young people who are doing that and earning the credits that they need. And finally, the New Jersey Center for Civic Education is located at Rutgers in New Brunswick. They have student competitions at the high school level, and they're both live and remote. The mock election is coming up, and that will be available in October, but there are two others that I've participated in that are really worthwhile. Project Citizen gives students the chance to act as a citizen can to make changes. They identify a problem in their community, and they learn how to use the political system in order to bring about change. And then We the People is a project where students study the Constitution over the course of the year. And at the end, there is a competition judged by attorneys where questions are presented to them, and they need to use the Constitution to support their arguments. Both of them are very high level, but very worthwhile. lots of resources, and you have the PowerPoint so you can go back to these. You don't need to make notes. So contact us, energizingyoungvoters@gmail.com, and please share these materials widely, and please provide us with feedback. When you use this with your students or know someone else who does, please have them contact us and tell us how many students were affected. We apply for grants in order to keep the program running, and it helps when we have the number of students who have been involved. So that's important to us, and if you can, we'd appreciate that. But we'd also appreciate knowing what works and what doesn't work. The materials that we have been teacher tested, but there are always differing site restrictions and so forth that can make it more challenging. So please let us know that. And also anything that you can provide to us about the delivery method that might be better. And that wraps it up for us. I think maybe there were questions that came in during the presentation. And so if there are, we're happy to offer them. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, Pat, this is Debbie Bradley. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I added one because I was filling out my ballot and I thought you might know it. What do people do who live in a community where they reside in one municipality, but their mailing address is listed as another when you're returning your ballot?
Peggy, do you want to take that one?
Pat, if you would repeat the question for me, I had a little trouble with my audio there.
What do you do if you've got your ballot, and you can correct me, Betty, if this is wrong. You have your ballot, but your address where you're returning it from is different from the address that the ballot was sent to. Am I correct, Betty?
No, it's really the New Jersey zip code problem where there are a lot of small municipalities that actually share a zip code. So I live in a municipality that's called, Delaware Township, but my mailing address is Stockton, New Jersey.
Is it the same county?
It's the same county, it's the same zip code, but I reside in Delaware Township, but my mailing address is Stockton. Which do you put as your address on a ballot?
The ballot will come to you with your address on it. Have you received information? Did you receive?
My ballot, so I should use the address that's on the ballot I received.
Yes. If you have questions at all, please feel free to call your Board of Elections at your county seat to confirm. But what when you normally vote, you go to the polls and your name and signature and address would be in the poll book. And I'm sure that none of us have noticed what the address is there, but the Board of Elections would have sent it to the address on record, I believe. But if you have any questions, don't take my word for it because it's an unusual situation. Call your Board of Elections and confirm that this is the valid ballot for you.
Thank you.
There is one other question, and that was if they can receive a link to the presentation. The presentation was sent out to all attendees via email before this presentation, but it will also, along with this webinar, was recorded and it will be archived on the NJPSA website. That's njpsa.org, along with links to the materials. So you can find it there. Pat and Peggy, I just want to thank you so much for such an informative presentation. I do, as you know, NJPSA has been a strong supporter of the League of Women Voters, and we feel that they just give so much in terms of resources. And, we know that people like you are volunteering for the League, and we thank you for that and for bringing to the educators all this great information and valuable resources. We really do appreciate that.
Thank you for your part in bringing that to Pat, very much.
Thank you, and thank you, Pat, for giving.
Thank you, everyone.